Welcome to lesson 15. Even though we're talking about things like pricing, growth, and impact in this lesson, really this lesson is about how to grow your business at a pace that aligns to your values and you could see the value that you're creating with the clients that you work with. And so it's the combination of these things. Pricing plays a lot into this because it looks at the way you look at sustainability and the growth of your business, but also looking at growth in different ways can help you align your values to the experience that you want to have as an entrepreneur. And finally, of course, we're doing this because we think that there's a unit of change. Welcome to lesson 15. In this lesson, we're going to talk about pricing strategies, what growth may look like for different people, and how we measure impact on our work. Pricing strategies, I'm going to talk to you about different mistakes I've seen people make, things that you should consider when coming out with your pricing. In growth, you'll see two different, really different perspectives. My approach to growth and what it means for me, and Kauai's approach, which looks very different than mine. And I think that kind of barbell approach will give you some ideas around everything on each end and what's in between. Also, we'll talk about how we measure impact in our work and give you some ideas and looking at how you will impact others with the work that you do. The number one mistake I see people make when they're first coming out and thinking about their pricing is they kind of figure out how much they want to make an hour, then figure out how many hours it's going to take, and then come up with the pricing that way. And that's kind of one frame or one lens to look at your pricing. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is, in addition to that, the way you might want to look at pricing is kind of the value you bring or the outcome um, or the result that the customer gets from that, because pricing sends a message around your value. For example, a lawyer might provide you with the exact same service, but one lawyer might only charge $100 an hour, and another lawyer might charge $1,000 an hour. And when you're looking at these things, even though they're doing the same things, you're gonna wonder why there's such a big difference. And what I'm talking to you about is making sure that you show the real value in your pricing and it sends a message. And also, if you undervalue your work, it makes it harder to grow, because most likely if you're undervaluing, you may be losing money or breaking even on each project and you have no cushion to utilize to reinvest in your business. So um, another way I think to think about it in the context of school systems is, let's say somebody sells a service to a school for only $1,000, but there was no impact. To me, that's much more expensive than somebody that sells a service for 10,000 and there's visible impact, right? So while the dollar amounts are uh, higher than the $1,000, if you're having an impact with the 10,000, that is a better value than spending $1,000 that provides no value. And so it really, that's why we created this lesson, so that you can look at pricing, how you want to grow, and the impact that you want to have. Here are four pricing models for you to consider, and each of these have pros and cons to them. So I'll go through each one of those in a little bit more detail. So first is the hourly model, right? So hourly may feel the most convenient for you because you're just, you set a rate, let's say it's $150 an hour, and you're just billing it an hour. But from a client perspective, a lot of times you have to think about both yourself and the client and how they receive this. From a client perspective, it's very unpredictable, especially within school systems where everything runs on a set budget. And so it's really important to look at caps on the hourly, which kind of gets to a project-based structure anyway. So usually they're going to want to cap a project because they won't want you to have kind of unlimited hours, especially when it's not clearly defined. Think about yourself when you hired somebody hourly, like let's say a lawyer sometimes, or an accountant, you get an hourly bill and you're kind of surprised that it's higher than what you thought. That often happens in hourly billing. Project-based billing, this is, as I mentioned earlier, is a lot easier for a client because for the project, it's easier for them to budget how much a project might cost. Let's say that a project costs $50,000, then the client knows that's how much they're budgeting. They don't expect more or less on the cost side. For you as the entrepreneur, though, it's a little bit trickier because if you scope the project too much, then and you realize that the $50,000 don't cover your cost, and you're going to be committed to this project, and you're going to lose money. Also, because you need to scope the project in more detail, usually in order to get the pricing right, and to commit to a number. Often the sales cycle might take a little bit longer as well. So that's why in some of the lessons before, we really had you focus on defining a methodology so that you know the phases and the approximate cost of each phase as you go through project-based proposals. The third way is through subscriptions, right? And if you're offering a software, this is the easiest way. We've all experienced monthly or annual subscriptions to something, and you just kind of end up paying year over year. This is ideal for entrepreneurs because the revenue is much more predictable and you have recurring customers and you're focused on retaining customers. But if you're not doing software, it's a lot harder to offer a subscription service. I've seen people do kind of annual memberships or private networks and things like that, that for services might work. But again, subscriptions are kind of hard for school systems to commit to, especially since school systems operate on a year-to-year budgeting cycle. The last kind of model would be the retainer model. And especially for solo entrepreneurs, the retainer model is very helpful because it gives you a predictable view of your income or revenue. However, what we're seeing is in retainer agreements is often they're vague. I've seen retainer agreements usually for certain high profile people, or because you just want to put their name on your website, or have them give advice kind of infrequently, but you're not sure what you're going to ask them to do, or influencers as such. But retainer approaches are kind of tricky because often, let's say you're doing a $5,000 retainer a month with a client, but usually the scope is fairly vague. And so often I've seen, if you don't manage those accounts right, that the customer somewhat is dissatisfied, or if there's a transition in management on the other side with your client, then someone questions whether that retainer is actually of value. And often I've seen cases where a person might lose their contract just because the retainer is the deliverables in the retainer are not fully defined.